Applause erupted around the gleaming conference table as Vita smiled triumphantly, basking in praise from the executive board. My throat tightened as she clicked through slide after slide of my team's revolutionary crisis response protocol, the system we'd spent 16 agonizing months creating. The rapid escalation matrix was my innovation, she announced with practiced confidence. After that breakthrough, all the other elements fell into place naturally. I gripped the armrests of my chair until my knuckles turned white. That matrix came from Drea's mind, the same Drea who worked until she collapsed on the office couch, who missed her sister's wedding, who developed migraines so severe she needed hospital visits. Next to me, Nico stared blankly ahead, his face ashen. Just 3 weeks ago, he'd been on a video call with us during his wife's labor, running simulations until the moment the nurses pulled him away. Our sacrifices, our brilliance, our work that would save actual lives by cutting emergency response times by 70% while drastically reducing costs. Yet Vita never said our names, not once. This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking that sets our organization apart, the board chairman gushed, his eyes alight with dollar signs. Full implementation across all global operations. And I'm nominating you personally for the Altman Leadership Award. As the meeting concluded, Vita strolled past my chair, leaned down, and whispered, "Team effort." Then she winked, actually winked, before gliding away to accept more congratulations. In our crisis center downstairs, I found my team huddled around the live stream, faces locked in various stages of devastation. Drea's eyes brimmed with tears. Nico punched a filing cabinet. Zane sat motionless, staring at his simulation models, the ones that had cost him countless nights of sleep and his long-term relationship. 16 months of sacrifice, erased in 45 minutes. I'd seen this coming, hadn't I? The way Vita inserted herself into final presentations, how she'd edited our reports to minimize our contributions. But this complete erasure? This was something else entirely. What she didn't realize, we had embedded something within our protocol, a safeguard born of suspicion and foresight. I pulled out my phone, my fingers surprisingly steady, and typed 5 words to my team. Initiate knowledge validation sequence now. Before I continue, if you've ever experienced someone taking credit for your work, hit like on this story. Drop a comment about how it felt, that punch to the gut when someone else collects praise for your sweat and tears. Subscribe to hear more stories of workplace justice. Now, let me tell you how this all began. My name is Amina. I lead the emergency response optimization team at a major international organization. I was recruited 4 years ago after developing a trauma response system for my previous employer that reduced mortality rates by 22%. My specialty is seeing patterns where others don't. Connections between seemingly unrelated data points that can be leveraged to save precious minutes during crises. I've always battled anxiety. Public speaking makes my hands shake. Large crowds drain me. But in a crisis, my mind becomes laser-focused, each thought crystallizing with perfect clarity. This contradiction has shaped my entire career. It started 18 months ago, when our organization faced a catastrophic failure during the Westbrook incident. A pipeline rupture in a remote area resulted in 7 deaths before response teams arrived. The Global Operations Board demanded a complete overhaul of our emergency protocols. Vita, our regional director, assembled a specialized team. She chose me to lead it along with 3 others. Drea, our statistical genius with unparalleled analytical skills. Nico, a former emergency responder with field experience and programming abilities. And Zane, a logistics specialist who could calculate resource distribution with uncanny accuracy. You have 1 year. Vita told us during our first meeting. Develop a protocol that cuts response time in half, without increasing operational costs. Make it scalable across all regions. Make it foolproof. We converted a windowless basement room into our workspace. Walls covered with maps, flowcharts, and simulation results. The early months brought failure after failure. Our simulations showed marginal improvements, but nothing revolutionary. Vita grew increasingly impatient. The board expects results, she reminded us weekly, arms crossed as she surveyed our progress. They're not interested in incremental changes. The breakthrough came during month 5. After a 72-hour work marathon, Drea stumbled upon what would become our rapid escalation matrix, a decision framework that could identify critical emergencies within seconds and automatically allocate resources based on 27 different variables. When we demonstrated the prototype to Vita, her eyes widened. This changes everything, she murmured, studying the simulation results. How soon can we implement a test version? 3 months minimum, I replied. Her smile vanished. You have 6 weeks. What followed was the most intense work period of our lives. Nico developed the integration software, often sleeping under his desk. Zane built resource allocation models so sophisticated they could predict supply needs down to individual medical items. Drea refined the matrix, running thousands of simulations to eliminate edge cases. I coordinated everything, connecting the components into a cohesive system while managing Vita's increasing demands for updates and presentations. We delivered the test version in 7 weeks. Vita was displeased about the delay, but couldn't argue with the results. A 43% reduction in response times during limited field trials. The board wants a full presentation next month, she announced. I'll need comprehensive documentation of everything you've done. We spent the next 3 weeks preparing exhaustive materials, technical specifications, simulation results, implementation guidelines. I personally compiled a 200-page report detailing our methodology and findings, with each team member's contributions clearly outlined. The day before Vita's board presentation, she requested a final briefing. Walk me through everything again, she said, settling into a chair in our crisis center. I need to understand every aspect before I present to the board. For 6 hours, we explained each component of the system. Drea detailed her matrix. Nico demonstrated the software interface. Zane walked through resource optimization models. I explained the integration architecture. Vita took minimal notes. Mostly, she nodded and asked occasional questions. You've done good work, she said when we finished. The board will be impressed. Will we be attending the presentation? I asked. Vita waved dismissively. No need. These meetings get technical. Too many questions would slow things down. I'll represent the team. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something felt wrong. I messaged Drea. Are you awake? Her response came immediately. Can't sleep. Thinking about tomorrow. Me too. Does something feel off to you? There was a long pause before her reply. Vita barely took notes today. How will she answer detailed questions? I stared at the ceiling, a cold realization settling in my stomach. She won't. She's going to present it as her own work. Can we do anything? I thought about our months of work, about the lives our protocol would save, about the knowledge embedded in our system that only we truly understood. Maybe. Meet me at the office at 5 a.m. Bring Nico and Zane. When my team arrived bleary-eyed the next morning, I explained my suspicion and proposed a solution. If Vita was planning what I feared, we needed protection, not just for our recognition, but for the integrity of the system itself. We need to embed a knowledge validation sequence, I explained. A series of decision pathways that require intuitive understanding of the protocol's foundations. Like fingerprints, Zane said, understanding immediately. Exactly. Anyone who truly created this system would navigate these pathways naturally. Anyone who didn't would make predictable mistakes, the same ones we made during development. We spent the next 3 hours modifying the protocol demonstration, embedding subtle choice points that would reveal an imposter. By 8:30 a.m., we had finished, just as Vita arrived, dressed immaculately for her presentation. Any last-minute advice? She asked, reviewing our slides. Just remember the foundation principles we discussed, I said carefully. The logic of the system flows from those core concepts. She barely glanced up. Of course. As she left for her presentation, carrying our work and 16 months of our lives with her, Drea whispered, will it be enough? I don't know, I admitted. But if she does what we think she's going to do, we'll be ready. None of us predicted the completeness of her betrayal. None of us imagined she would erase us entirely. After sending the text to initiate our knowledge validation sequence, I gathered my shocked team. What now? Nico asked, his voice hollow. Now, I said, we prepare for the international implementation briefing in 2 weeks. Vita will be expected to guide the expanded leadership through a live demonstration of her groundbreaking protocol. And if she refuses to do the demonstration? Zane asked. I smiled thinly. She won't. People who steal credit are always convinced they understand the work better than those who actually did it. The 2 weeks between Vita's presentation and the international implementation briefing crawled by like torture. My team and I maintained perfect professionalism, answering Vita's increasingly frequent questions about the protocol while feigning ignorance about her deception. Amina, I need the detailed breakdown of the tertiary response patterns, she demanded 3 days before the briefing, dropping a stack of papers on my desk. The ones outlined in Section 7 of the report? I thought you had those. Vita's smile tightened. Just get them to me by noon. The chairman wants additional data before the briefing. After she left, Drea whispered from her workstation. She's panicking. She doesn't understand how the tertiary patterns connect to the escalation matrix. Good, I replied quietly. Let her panic. That night, Nico called me at 11 p.m., his voice tense. Vita just requested access to all our development simulations. Said she needs them for verification purposes. Give her the access, I said calmly. But remember, those simulations won't help her understand the intuitive decision pathways we built into the protocol. She's working overtime trying to understand what she stole, Nico said with bitter satisfaction. The morning of the briefing arrived with a strange sense of calm. My team gathered in our crisis center, preparing to attend remotely. We had been specifically not invited to the physical meeting. Vita had made certain of that, but as implementation team members, we were required to observe. Just as we connected to the live stream, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Be in boardroom in 15 minutes. Chairman's request. Followed immediately by, bring your team. Kayla, executive assistant. We looked at each other in confusion. Is this part of the plan? Zane asked. No, I admitted. But let's go. The top floor boardroom was packed with international leadership when we arrived. Executives from 5 continents sat around the massive table, while regional directors lined the walls. Vita stood at the front, shuffling through presentation materials, her confident demeanor faltering slightly when she spotted us entering. The chairman, Gregory, nodded at us. Ah, the implementation team. Please, find seats. We're about to begin. Vita approached me hurriedly. What are you doing here? She hissed. Chairman's request, I replied simply. Is there a problem? Before she could answer, Gregory called the meeting to order. 30 pairs of eyes turned toward Vita as she composed herself and stepped to the front. Good morning, everyone. As you know, the board has approved full implementation of our new crisis response protocol, a system that will revolutionize how we handle emergencies worldwide. She clicked to the first slide, the same presentation she had given 2 weeks ago. Today, I'll guide you through a live demonstration to show how this protocol functions in real-world scenarios. For 30 minutes, Vita confidently presented the overview of the protocol, repeating many of her previous talking points. My team and I remained silent, watching the international leadership nod with approval. Now, Gregory announced, the most valuable part of today's briefing. Vita has agreed to guide us through a live crisis simulation using her groundbreaking protocol. This will give all regional directors a clear understanding of implementation requirements. Vita smiled, though I noticed a slight tremor in her hand as she moved to the simulation controls. I'd be happy to demonstrate. The lights dimmed as the simulation loaded on the room's main screen. It was one of our most complex scenarios, a chemical spill near a population center with multiple complicating factors. The simulation was designed to evaluate decision-making under extreme pressure. This scenario requires rapid assessment and resource deployment, Vita explained. The protocol's escalation matrix immediately categorizes the emergency and suggests initial response measures. She navigated through the first decision points with reasonable competence, clearly having studied our documentation thoroughly. The international executives watched with interest as the simulation progressed. Then came the first knowledge checkpoint, a subtle decision junction where intuitive understanding of the underlying principles became crucial. At this juncture, Vita explained, we implement standard containment procedures while escalating to secondary response teams. She selected the corresponding option, and the simulation showed an immediate degradation in containment effectiveness. A small red indicator flashed on the screen. Vita hesitated, clearly surprised by the outcome. This represents a common pitfall in crisis response, prioritizing containment before completing full hazard assessment. Nice recovery, I thought, but the next checkpoint was approaching. As the simulation continued, Vita encountered more knowledge checkpoints and decision points that required deep understanding of how the components interacted. With each incorrect choice, the simulated crisis worsened. Resource allocation became inefficient. Response times increased. The situation deteriorated. The room grew tense as executives exchanged concerned glances. Vita's confident demeanor crumbled as she struggled to explain the increasingly problematic outcomes. Are these expected results? Gregory asked, frowning at the escalating failure metrics on screen. I'm deliberately showing potential pitfalls, Vita stammered. selecting another option that only worsened the simulated crisis. In a real implementation, we would avoid these common mistakes. But her choices revealed deeper misunderstandings with each decision. The simulation was now showing critical failure in multiple areas, exactly the patterns we had encountered and corrected during early development. Gregory's frown deepened. The failure cascade seems systematic. Is this demonstrating worst-case scenarios? I watched Vita's shoulders tense as she struggled to maintain composure. This was the moment we had prepared for, but I felt no joy witnessing her unraveling, only a hollow vindication that truth was finally emerging. Finally, I stood up. Our protocol incorporates what we call expertise verification, I explained, keeping my voice even. It presents decision points that reveal true understanding. Without that knowledge, choices naturally expose comprehension gaps through progressive scenario deterioration. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me, then back to Vita, whose face had drained of color. Expertise verification? Gregory repeated slowly. I don't recall that feature in the presentation. It's a quality control measure, I continued, designed to ensure that only properly trained personnel can implement the protocol. The system naturally guides knowledgeable users toward optimal decisions while revealing knowledge gaps in those without proper training. Vita stared at me, a mixture of shock and fury in her eyes. Gregory turned to her. Is this correct? There are nuances to the simulation that, she stuttered. Would you show us how the protocol is meant to function? Gregory asked, looking directly at me. I walked to the simulation controls, heart pounding. Vita stepped aside, her expression unreadable. Taking a deep breath, I reset the simulation to its starting point. As the scenario unfolded, I navigated through each decision point with the intuitive understanding that comes only from having built the system from nothing. The knowledge checkpoints that had trapped Vita now revealed their purpose, guiding the response in ways that optimized resources and minimized response times. The metrics on screen showed immediate improvement. Where Vita's attempts had led to cascading failures, my decisions stabilized the crisis, deployed resources efficiently, and brought the emergency under control. When I completed the simulation, the room remained silent for several seconds. Then Gregory cleared his throat. That was illuminating. The contrast is quite striking. He looked at Vita, whose face had hardened into a mask. Perhaps you could explain the discrepancy in outcomes? Before Vita could respond, Drea stood up. The rapid escalation matrix that forms the foundation of this protocol was developed through hundreds of iterations. Each decision point reflects a lesson learned through failure and correction. You cannot memorize these decision pathways. You must understand the principles behind them. And who developed these principles? Gregory asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. We did, I said, gesturing to my team. Drea created the rapid escalation matrix during an exhaustive analysis of historical response data. Nico built the integration software while testing it against real-world parameters. Zane developed the resource allocation models that optimized deployment. I coordinated the components and designed the overall architecture. The international executives exchanged glances. One of them, a senior operations director from Asia, leaned forward. You're saying you, this team, created the protocol? Not Director Vita? We created it, I confirmed. Over 16 months. Under Director Vita's supervision, the room erupted in murmurs. Gregory raised his hand for silence, then turned to Vita. Is this accurate? Vita straightened her shoulders, composing herself. I led the initiative from concept to completion. This team worked under my direction, implementing my vision and strategy. Their technical contributions were valuable, but that's not what you told the board 2 weeks ago, Gregory interrupted. You presented this as your innovation, your breakthrough that would revolutionize our operations. You accepted a leadership award nomination based on that representation. I simplified for clarity, Vita insisted. Development is always complex, with many contributors. Nico stood up next. When you presented to the board, you stated, and I quote, "The rapid escalation matrix was my innovation. After that breakthrough, all the other elements fell into place naturally. That matrix came from Drea's work. She collapsed from exhaustion developing it. And you said nothing about a team?" Zane added. Not one word about the people who missed family events, sacrificed personal relationships, and pushed through physical and mental limits to create this protocol. Vita's face flushed with anger. This is insubordination. I won't stand here and be accused. You told me team effort and winked after taking complete credit for our work. I interjected quietly. Those were your exact words. Gregory studied us all for a long moment. The tension in the room was palpable. I believe we need to re-examine the origins of this protocol, he finally said, and its attribution. He turned to the room of executives. We'll take a 30-minute recess. When we return, I'd like to hear directly from this team about the development process. As people began filing out, Gregory approached me. I'd like to speak with you privately, he said, nodding toward a side door. My team watched anxiously as I followed Gregory into a smaller conference room. My heart pounded. This could go either way, vindication or career suicide. Sit down, Amina, he said, closing the door behind us. I perched on the edge of a chair, hands clasped tightly in my lap. What you did in there, he began slowly, embedding verification triggers in a mission-critical protocol that was either incredibly reckless or brilliantly foresighted. I met his gaze. We didn't compromise the protocol's functionality. We simply ensured it couldn't be properly demonstrated without actual understanding. A safeguard against exactly what happened today, he observed. Yes, Gregory sighed heavily. Why didn't you come to me when you suspected Vita would take credit for your work? The question hit me like a physical blow. I'd asked myself the same thing countless times over the past 2 weeks. Because I had no proof, I admitted. Just a feeling. A pattern of behavior. I looked down at my hands. And because people like Vita don't get to their position without powerful allies, I couldn't risk my team's careers on what might have been dismissed as jealousy or resentment. Gregory nodded slowly. So instead you built a trap that would only spring if your suspicions were correct. A validation system. I corrected gently. If Vita had truly collaborated with us, truly understood the work, she would have navigated those decision points correctly. The system only exposed what was already true. He studied me for a long moment. You know, most people in your position would have compiled email records or recorded conversations, created a paper trail. Your approach was unconventional. Those things can be disputed or explained away, I said. What happened in that room cannot. Everyone saw the difference between understanding and memorization. Gregory leaned back in his chair, a glimmer of respect in his eyes. You're right, and that's why I want you to lead the global implementation team. When I didn't immediately respond, he continued, unless you'd prefer to continue working under Director Vita? No, I said quickly. I mean, what about Vita? That's being addressed separately. His tone made it clear the conversation about Vita was over. The question is whether you're ready to step up. This would mean relocating to our international headquarters, building a new team, and reporting directly to the executive board. My mind raced. I hadn't planned for this outcome. Vindication, yes, but not immediate promotion. What about my current team? They would have the option to join you with appropriate promotions or remain in their current location with new leadership. I thought of Drea, Nico, and Zane, everything we'd been through together. I need to discuss this with them before making any decisions. Gregory smiled. I expected nothing less. Take the rest of the day. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning. When I returned to the main boardroom, it was nearly empty. My team waited anxiously by the door. What happened? Drea asked immediately. Where is everyone? I countered. Emergency closed session with the executive board, Zane explained. Vita was escorted there 10 minutes ago. She looked not good. Gregory offered me leadership of the global implementation team, I told them, with promotions for all of you if you want to join me at international headquarters. Their reactions ranged from shock to excitement. Nico whistled low. That was fast, he said. What about Vita? He wouldn't say, but I don't think she'll be in charge of anything important anytime soon. We left the building together, still processing the day's events. None of us felt like celebrating, not yet. The vindication was satisfying but exhausting. We agreed to meet the next morning to discuss our options before the reconvened meeting. That night, alone in my apartment, I finally allowed myself to feel everything I'd suppressed during the confrontation. The relief, the lingering anger, the uncertainty about the future. My phone buzzed with a text from Drea. Did we do the right thing? I stared at her message for a long time before responding. We protected our work, and maybe prevented her from doing this to someone else. The next morning arrived with unexpected news. A company-wide email announced Vita's immediate reassignment to a subsidiary office in a remote location, effectively a demotion, disguised as a lateral move. By the time we gathered for the reconvened meeting, rumors were already circulating about her dramatic fall from grace. The boardroom was different this morning, smaller, with only Gregory, 2 executive board members, and my team present. A stack of documents sat in the center of the table. Before we begin, Gregory said, I want to clarify something. Yesterday's events have raised serious concerns about leadership and attribution within our organization. He slid the stack of documents toward me. These are revised materials for the crisis response protocol, with your team properly credited as creators. Additionally, we're withdrawing Vita's nomination for the Altman Leadership Award and submitting your team instead. I opened the top document. There it was. Our names listed as primary developers, Drea as creator of the Rapid Escalation Matrix, Nico as software architect, Zane as resource optimization specialist, my name as team leader and system architect. Thank you, I said, emotion threatening to overcome my professional demeanor. This means everything to us. Gregory nodded. Now, about the implementation leadership position. We've discussed it, I interrupted, glancing at my team. We would like to accept with one condition. Gregory raised an eyebrow, which is, we implement the protocol as a team, with shared leadership. Each of us has specialized knowledge critical to its success. Hierarchical leadership failed us once. We won't repeat that mistake. The executive board members exchanged glances. Unconventional, one of them noted. So was our protocol, I replied. Conventional thinking wouldn't have reduced response times by 70%. Gregory smiled slowly. Very well. Shared leadership of the global implementation team, with appropriate compensation adjustments for all of you. He extended his hand. Welcome to the executive level. As we left the meeting, Drea squeezed my arm. We did it, she whispered. Not quite, I replied quietly. There's one more thing. 2 months later, we stood in the grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel, surrounded by industry leaders at the annual International Safety and Crisis Response Conference. Our protocol had been successfully implemented across 3 continents, with remarkable results. Emergency response times had decreased exactly as our simulations had predicted, and initial data suggested potential lives saved already exceeded double digits. Gregory had insisted we attend the conference to accept the Innovation Excellence Award, the industry's highest honor for breakthrough safety protocols. What he didn't know was that I had made another arrangement. As we sipped champagne during the pre-ceremony reception, Drea nudged me. Are you sure about this? Absolutely, I replied. She's already here. Across the room, looking significantly less polished than she once had, stood Vita. Her reassignment had not been kind to her. The remote subsidiary office dealt with routine maintenance issues, about as far from prestigious crisis management as one could get while remaining in the organization. She hadn't seen us yet. I had arranged her invitation personally, requesting she attend as a former contributor to crisis response initiatives. Her pride wouldn't let her decline, despite her diminished status. It's time, Nico murmured as the lights dimmed, and attendees began moving toward their seats. The ceremony proceeded with the expected speeches and presentations. Finally, the conference chairman approached the podium for the main award. The Innovation Excellence Award recognizes breakthrough approaches that redefine industry standards, he announced. This year's recipient has revolutionized crisis response with a protocol that reduces emergency response times by an unprecedented 70% while optimizing resource utilization. On the giant screens flanking the stage, video began playing, footage we had compiled of our team during development. Drea asleep at her desk after 30 hours of continuous work. Nico participating in his child's birth via video call while running simulations. Zane meticulously mapping resource flows at 3 a.m. Me presenting early findings to skeptical regional managers. From concept to implementation, this protocol represents the pinnacle of collaborative innovation, the chairman continued as the footage played. Created by a team whose dedication extended far beyond professional obligation, whose personal sacrifices ensured countless lives will be saved for years to come. I found Vita in the crowd. She sat frozen, eyes locked on the screens, displaying the truth she had tried to erase. Please welcome to the stage, Amina, Drea, Nico, and Zane, the creators of the Rapid Integrated Crisis Response Protocol. The room erupted in applause as we made our way to the stage. When we reached the podium, I pulled a folded paper from my pocket, the text I had prepared weeks ago. Thank you for this tremendous honor, I began. This protocol represents not just innovation in crisis response, but a testament to what becomes possible when organizations recognize and support the collaborative nature of true innovation. I looked directly at Vita as I continued. Every breakthrough comes from many minds working together. No single person can claim sole credit for complex innovation. Leaders don't create, they nurture the creativity of others. The crowd applauded enthusiastically, unaware of the targeted nature of my words. Only Vida understood they were meant specifically for her. I watched as she slipped quietly from her chair and headed for the exit. As she reached the door, I pressed the small button on my phone that triggered the final slide, a compilation of quotes from her board presentation, paired with footage of our actual development work. Her voice played through the speakers. The rapid escalation matrix was my innovation, while the screen showed Drea developing the exact calculations. Vida froze in the doorway as her voice continued. After that breakthrough, all the other elements fell into place naturally. The screen split to show Nico and Zane working through the night to build those other elements. The room fell silent as understanding dawned. Industry leaders from around the world watched as the truth became undeniable. Vida, now the center of attention again, but not as she had once hoped, stood paralyzed in the spotlight of public exposure. I hadn't planned to humiliate her. I had simply arranged for the truth to be undeniable, inescapable, and witnessed by everyone who mattered in our industry. The 5-word text that had initiated our knowledge validation sequence had led here, to a moment where the truth could speak for itself without our intervention. As Vida finally pushed through the doors and disappeared, I returned to my prepared remarks. We accept this award on behalf of everyone who believes that innovation thrives when credit is shared, contributions are honored, and truth prevails. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for our protocol, it was for the principle we had defended. Later that night, as we celebrated in a quiet corner of the hotel bar, Drea raised her glass. To justice served cold, to truth that speaks for itself, I corrected, clinking my glass against hers. I still can't believe you arranged all that footage, Zane marveled. How did you know we'd win the award? I didn't, I admitted. I just knew we'd eventually have an audience that mattered. The truth just needed the right stage. Nico smiled. And all it took was one text message to start it all. I nodded, remembering that moment of decision in the boardroom, watching Vida bask in stolen glory. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't what you do to someone else. It's simply creating circumstances where they reveal themselves. If you've ever had to stand up for yourself against someone who tried to diminish your work or steal your thunder, I hope this story resonated with you. Drop a comment about how you handled it or what you wish you'd done differently. Like and subscribe for more stories about workplace justice and the power of standing your ground. Remember, your work matters, your contributions are valuable, and sometimes the most effective response to injustice is simply ensuring the truth has its moment in the spotlight.